Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to talk about accounting case writing tips with examples and templates. If you haven't already, it would be great if you could subscribe to the channel and also like the video. Thanks. To give you guys an overview of this video, it can be broken down into the following three components. The first being reading the case, then it's going to be planning the case, and finally writing the case. After that, I'll show you an example of how I would write a case and the template I would use. And for anyone that is crazy enough to actually watch until the end of this video, I'll also give you guys a bonus tip on how to write your cases in Excel. So now let's talk about reading the case. CPA suggests that people should take about 25 to 30% of your total case time on just reading. However, I'd say that if you really need more time or less time, don't worry about it. Just don't rush yourself and make sure you read enough so that you understand the case and you're not missing any case facts. So the next thing I would recommend students do is to jot down any key facts. For example, dates. Dates are very important in any case. What I would do is always draw a timeline, like you see on the screen right now. On the bottom left, you would see, the different dates and what they represent. I would always draw a straight line like that on my case and mark down any important things that happen along the way. The next would be the characters. Who are the users, right? Who are the people within this case? The next would be the constraints, right? Is there a bank covenant? Is there a regulatory requirement? Is it IFRS? Is it ASPE, right? The next, I would go into the actual issues. So as you find every required, you would be able to mark it down on your case and be like, okay, this is a revenue rec issue, this is a accounting issue, this is an impairment issue, so on and so forth. Here, I would say not to go crazy on your notes and don't try to jot down every little thing that is about that point. Your notes are not marked at the end of the day. So you don't need to make the perfect planning notes. You just need to make enough notes so that when you actually write your case, you can turn back to this paper and be able to just see all those points and then just quickly go and read from the actual case, what are the actual case facts. My last tip, which is I believe is the best tip, is use highlighters, right? Highlight your heart out. I bring all the highlighters I have, all the different colors I have, and I would just highlight everything. All the users I would highlight as one color. All the dates I would highlight one color. All the issues I would highlight as one color. And what that does is that helps you really quickly read through the case, especially when you just want to pinpoint different things to identify it and then just use it right away. And again, just a word of caution, this document that you're making, which is your planning document, it is not marked. So don't try to make the perfect set of notes before you start writing the case. So now let's talk about tips on planning the case. At this time, you should have your planning document ready and you just have a list of all the different issues you want to talk about. Your next step is to prioritize them. The reason for prioritizing is because you want to make sure that if you don't have enough time to finish your whole case, you've talked about the most important issues first. So what are those most important issues? I would say anything to do with revenue recognition is going to be at the top of your list. After that, it's any concerns or anything that the user has told you they really want you to look into. And then after that is if the case has provided a significant amount of details on a particular issue, that's also probably important as well. The next step is to allocate your time. I would always personally take 2 to 3 minutes out of my case and write an overall conclusion at the very end. And that's because I really believe that having that conclusion ties up your case very well and summarizes everything that you've suggested to the users. And from a marker's point of view, it really makes them understand that the candidate knew what they were talking about and has a good understanding of the case. With the remaining time, then I would just divide it equally amongst all the issues. And after that, I would start massaging the time around. So for my less priority issues, I would maybe take 2 to 3 minutes and I would put it to my more higher priority issues. Or if I knew that there's something that I could do in less amount of time, I would subtract from there and then put it to somewhere else where I really thought that, this is going to be a tough one and I'm just going to be on this for a little bit, so I'm going to add more time to it. But overall, the guideline for this allocating time section, I would say, is just try to be realistic with yourself. If you believe that you need a little bit more time, give yourself a little bit more time. But once you've set your timing limits for each issue, try to stick to it as much as possible. The worst thing you can do is you think that you just need a couple more minutes here and there, and there's no more time in the case, and you've only went through your first two issues out of 5. So what I always tell people is set realistic time limits for each issue. And if you just hit those time limits, just move on to the next issue. You don't want to steal the time from the next issue. The last tip I want to talk about in planning is just take a step back after you've done your planning, allocated your time, take a step back and ask yourself, did I miss any issues? Yeah, that's right. Did I miss any issues? If you've missed any issues for any candidate, that's pretty devastating because it's a significant chunk of your mark, especially if you've missed, let's say, a tax issue or a assurance issue, because there might not be a lot of those on your case. So how do you know if you've actually missed an issue? So what I'd say is, if when you're allocating your time and you realize, oh, it seems like I have a lot of time to do all my issues comfortably, then you should just take your step back and be like, did I miss anything? Because accounting exams or accounting cases are not designed for you to comfortably finish every issue with the amount of time given. So now let's talk about some tips that you guys are probably more interested in, which is how to actually write the case. So my first tip would be to be concise, right? Make every sentence that you write count. Don't go off on tangents, just write what the case wants you to write. The next one would be try to be case specific. And I tell this to a lot of candidates. If you can take your sentence that you wrote for an issue and apply it to another case with the same issue, and if that sentence still applies, then your sentence is not case specific at all. So, for example, if we're doing a case on a telecommunications company and their revenue is from phones, then you should talk about telecommunications or phones or some other words along those lines within your issue to make it case specific. The next thing you can do is to state your criteria. Whether you're copying and pasting from the handbook into your case or just memorizing those criteria and summarizing it on your case, it should be there somewhere. And that's how you're going to get some depth. The next thing I see a lot of candidates not do is to not conclude on their issue. They do a great job analyzing what the alternatives are and what the company should do, but they don't really tell them, explicitly at least, what is their final recommendation. And this is why I would always recommend to candidates to say, I recommend, or I conclude that, right? You want to have that very clear statement of what you are telling the client to do. And as a marker, we love this. As soon as you see it, you're like, great, it has a recommendation. So it's an easy step, one-liner, and that's something that I would say always include in your case writing. The next tip we're going to talk about a little bit more on the next slide, which is have a structure. We're going to talk about, having an issue statement at the beginning, going into what the handbook says, what are the criterias, then analyzing it based on those criterias, having a recommendation and conclusion, and then finally finishing it off with an impact statement. So now let's talk about the structure of your responses in case writing. And here's a template that I personally use for all my accounting issues. I first go through the issue, then the analysis, then the recommendation. So in this example here, we're saying that ABC Inc. started developing some new iron supplement pills in 2021 and is expensing all the costs. So it's just a simple sentence saying what are they currently doing. Then I go into what I currently think the issue is. So the issue here is whether the items should be capitalized or expensed. As simple as that, 2 sentences, and that's it. What you note here is that I'm not jumping the gun and telling them exactly if they did it right or if they did it wrong. I'm trying to be unbiased as possible and not stating my final recommendation or jumping to the conclusion right away. Then I start my analysis and I talk about as per IFRS or ASPE. Depending on what standard you're using, you'll pick your one. And then it goes into all the following needs to be met for the supplements to be capitalized. So this is where you bring in some case facts and some criteria. The criteria, you could either memorize it or you can get it from the handbook. Case facts, you're obviously going to find them in the case. And then you're going to just go through each one and say they're either met or not met. From the recommendations point of view, you start with, I recommend, right? What should they do? Just tell them straight up what they should do. And then you go into, as a result, assets will increase by X and expenses will decrease by X in 2021. So you want to also end with an impact statement, especially if the owners or the users have told you they really care either about revenues or they care about sales or they care about expenses. So now let's talk about how to actually write that in an ideal response. So here you see, I stated again the first two sentences. That's all you really need. You don't need more than that. This is a good enough issue statement. And then we go into the analysis. You see that I've stated, as per ASPE 3064.41, the intangible assets arising from development is recognized if and only if an entity can demonstrate all of the following. And then I talk about what all the criteria are. You could see here that it seems fairly intense, and I've kind of highlighted what are the key things in each criteria by bolding them. And then at the end of it, I said met or not met, and I put some case facts. In number 2, you could see that I've also indented and put met and non-met on a separate line. If you want, you could also do that as well. I've just done that for one line, but some people do it for every single line, just to make it easier for the marker to see, okay, that's your criteria, and the line underneath is where all your case facts is, and it's clearly saying met or not met. The reason I do that is because I want to give the marker the ability to quickly just skim through or read through my case and just see exactly where my criteria stops and where my case facts and my explanations begin. Because you don't get marks for just stating the criteria. You get marks by stating the criteria and tying it in to case facts. And then now let's look at that recommendation. Again, I'm talking about saying the keywords I recommend and then what should happen. And then I go into what is the impact. So the assets will increase by 100,000 and expenses will decrease by 100,000. If you want to be a star student, you could also talk about other facts that are related to this issue. So I talk about, however, any research related cost needs to be expensed and not capitalized. So this seems like the ideal response, what I'd expect from someone that, knows all their technical and is able to deliver a very well thought out response. But for, let's say, the average folks, I would say that this is what I would go for. If you compare the two, it is a lot less wordy. It is more straight to the point. And in my opinion, this is enough to get you a competent. Right? If we look at it again, what essentially changed is the criteria part. Instead of copy and pasting the full criterias, I just took out those keywords. And if you're not someone that can copy and paste criteria from the handbook fairly quickly and you're just going to memorize it, then I'd say this is the way to go. You talk about just the key facts. So technical feasibility, intention to complete and use or sell, ability to use or sell, existence of market, and so on and so forth. So you don't have to be super wordy, just list the key criteria and then just talk about it, right? Again, the recommendation would be I recommend and the results. So as promised, this is the bonus tip for Excel calculations. Congrats if you've actually made it so far. I hope I didn't bore you to death. And here's some tips. So the first one is going to be, if you ever need to do any calculations in your Excel, make sure you have a purpose statement and a conclusion within your Excel. Not just within your Excel, you want to have a statement outside in your Word document as well. To just briefly restate what was the conclusion, because you want to make sure that your Word document is a complete document that people don't have to flip back and forth too many times to figure out what's going on. The next tip I can give you is, if you're doing any calculations in your Excel and the numbers that you're given to use those to do those calculations are within the case, you could just simply type given in the cell next to it. But if the numbers you're using are not given, for example, you're doing a projection of sales for the next 5 years and salary expenses are supposed to go up by 5%, then write that in the cell beside it so that the marker knows exactly why is salaries increasing every year by 5%. With everything done on Excel now, the marker can actually click into the cells and understand your formulas if you don't have anything written, but my rule of thumb is you want to make it easier for the marker to understand what you're doing, and to make them want to click into every single cell is just going to anger them more and more. So make it easy on them, write down what you actually did in the cell next to it. And what I'd say is, if you're not into writing these descriptions, my warning would be is you would hope that you do all these calculations correctly, because if you don't and the marker can't understand what you did and your formula is just wrong, they probably won't give you a high mark for these. So now let's talk about some pitfalls to case writing. So the first one's going to be, a lot of students or candidates don't read the information carefully. They either misinterpret the information or they just skimmed over it and they don't even know that it actually existed. So really take the time to read your case. The next one's going to be, don't go over time on any issues. If you gave one issue 5 minutes, use that 5 minutes. Don't use 8 minutes. Don't use 7 minutes, because those 2 to 3 minutes that you're stealing from another issue, that could be time that you needed to finish that issue. And if you keep stealing a couple minutes here and there from each issue, you're going to be left with one issue left and you're not going to have enough time to do it. The next one is not following the template. So it's going to be things like you're not being concise, you're not concluding, or you're just jumping to conclusions. After that, I'd say many students just are not case specific. They just state the criteria and they say what should be done in an ideal scenario, and they don't even mention why. Like, how does it pertain to this specific issue, this specific case? The next thing is using the wrong technical or the wrong criteria, which means you just need to really brush up on your accounting in terms of what the handbook says, how to actually do the transaction, what does it even mean? And the last one being not debriefing. Debriefing really sucks. It takes a lot of time and nobody likes to do it. But I would say it normally should take you twice as long to debrief the case than to actually write the case. And yes, everyone hates it, including me, but it is something that is very necessary for the case writing process, and that is actually where you learn the most, because you could see what is the ideal answer, what is your answer, how do you get your answer to the ideal answer, and if you just didn't even handle that issue or you didn't even write about the issue, that's where you can look back and be like, what is the triggers to write that issue? As always, thank you so much for watching my video. If you've made it till the end, kudos to you, because I know this is a long one. So thanks again. If you like the video, please like and subscribe. If you don't, keep it to yourself again. And any suggestions, I'd really appreciate it. Write it in the comments. Thanks.